an inspired group of transplant patients, families, and donors, and we're united in our mission to give back to Northwestern medicine and at the same time connect with the transplant community. Well, you know, what does this mean, and how did it change our life, and how have we changed our life? Not too long ago, one of our council members came to me with a personal issue, medical issue, and we were talking about it, and we finished up the conversation, and she looked at me and she had this little twinkle in her eye, and she says, you know, if I can get through a liver transplant, I can get through anything. And it really makes you much stronger. But organ transplantation today, it wasn't like this years ago. And we all have lots of stories, and some of the stories are new, some of the stories are old. But last week I received an email from somebody, and I'd like to read it to you because I think it illustrates really how far we've come. It says, my husband received a liver transplant in 1989 when Dr. Al Baker was head of transplantation. My husband passed away last year at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. I was his primary caregiver through many struggles and crises. But I also got to experience many happy years as a result of his wonderful gift and super talented, compassionate, and dedicated medical practitioners. Now, I haven't talked to this lady. Her name's Margaret. I don't know how old she is. I don't know how old her husband is, but the average age of a liver transplant is 60 years old. That was 26 years ago, so, you know, maybe he was in his 80s. I don't know. But the point is that with the gift of life and the opportunity to be with his family is really priceless, and he had an opportunity to make a difference in the world. Our own council member, Marcia Goldstick, had been turned down by 3 other transplant centers, and she came to Northwestern, and they said, you know, we can do this, and they did it. And she's had many, many years after her transplant leading a productive life. She's on her council. We nickname her Spunky, which I think is appropriate. But I started to think about the what-ifs. You know, what if in 1989 when Margaret's husband had this transplant, what if in 1989 we decided, or the hospital decided, you know, this is good enough. We don't need any more advances in medical science. Or maybe they said, we don't have the money to do it. We can't do it. We can't spend the money to do what's necessary to make the lives of a transplant patient better. And we can't improve the lives of our patients any more than what we're doing today. Well, think about that if we had stood still in 1989. I don't know what the exact result would be, but here's what I do know. I know that the audience wouldn't be as large as it is today, and I know for sure that I wouldn't be standing here. But lucky for us, that's not who we are, that's not how we operate, that is what makes us tick. Northwestern is a center of excellence because the physicians, the scientists, the staff have dedicated their lives to make your life better. And for those that are waiting on the transplant list today. And many times this is done at great personal sacrifice by the people that care for us. How many of you have seen the movie Titanic? Okay. Well, if you haven't seen it, you kind of know what the outcome is. We all know the ending. If you saw the movie, you were sitting on the edge of your chair, and you were kind of maybe hoping for a different outcome. You thought maybe something different might happen. Well, we were on the Titanic, okay? And we didn't know it at the time. We hit the iceberg. We started to take on the water. We didn't know how our movie would end, okay? Many of us faced the inevitable, and at one point, I suppose, we were rearranging the chairs on the Titanic. We were listening to the music, but our movie really ended differently, and the lifeboats came. And our lifeboats were the dedicated staff, the physicians, and those that have dedicated their lives to save our lives. And they decided in 1989 that it wasn't good enough, it had to be better, and we had to strive for excellence. Some of the family members that were donors, some were complete strangers, but the donors are really the unsung heroes, and we are very, very grateful to you. And I would like all of the donors and their recipients, if you could all stand up, because I know there's many of you in the audience today, because we want to be able to honor you. You all have your unique stories, and I know many of them, and most of them are very, very emotional. There's one other person in the audience, Patty Bonnick. Patty, could you stand up? Where are you? Patty came all the way from northern Wisconsin to be at this meeting today. She donated her kidney to her donor, who's standing next to her, and she's writing a book on stories. She's not going to approach you, but if you'd like to be part of her book and tell your story to her, she already has about three different stories here from Northwestern. Thank you, Patty. And thank you, everybody, for all you've done. You know, I would argue, and the docs are going to disagree, you know, there is no organ shortage. We all have 2 kidneys. You know, we can get by on one. We can all afford to maybe give up a piece of our liver. So in my simple mind, there's no organ shortage, and I'm truly amazed by the number of good Samaritans that come forward to donate an organ. And talking to some of you today, you just decided this is something that I need to do. And you gave the gift of life to somebody else. I've also been asked, what's the most prevalent common denominator of a transplant patient or the recipient? And that answer is pretty simple. It's gratefulness. Those in our village and those in our board are extremely grateful, and we have only goodwill to provide, and we've made a difference. We've created Transplant Village. We have a strong council. Last year, and I think many of you were there, we honored the first half-century of achievements at our 50th anniversary event with a sellout crowd. We had over 500 people there. We've quintupled the amount and number of donors who have contributed to the center, and we've grown the alumni base of the village, and we've enhanced old relationships, and we've built new relationships. We established the Patient Assistance Fund to help those in need that are in a donut hole with Medicare or can't afford the parking. And later in our program, Jeff Crane, one of our council members, will talk to you about our new endowment campaign. Jeff will explain how our endowment will ensure the viability of the Transplant Center for the next 50 years. And I'd like to thank all the council members, if you'd all stand and be recognized, and they all have on this type of badge on. Please stand up. And I would personally like to thank you for all your time and energy that you've spent to make this a success. We have to do our part in the future to make sure there's no what-ifs. In 1989, these folks like us made it possible to advance science to where it is today and for all of us to be here today. Now it's our obligation, our responsibility to pay forward and help those that are waiting on the transplant list today. It's imperative that we maintain and enhance the important research that is being done here today. As I've mentioned, there's been great advances. We've accomplished a lot in the first 50 years. The first transplant must have taken a lot of courage for both the patient and the doctor. Dr. John Bergen was the physician that performed the first kidney transplant here 50 years ago. And I'd like to invite Dr. Advocacy up, and he will offer a tribute to Dr. Bergen that paved the way for us.
So first of all, Thank you all for coming. I'm really in awe of the efforts that have been put forth by the Transplant Village and the commitment and the passion. I really want to thank Dan for his leadership and the Transplant Village for their leadership and activities. So I did my first liver transplant in 1989, so it's kind of a good year for me. Things were very different. Cyclosporin had just come on the market in 1985, and we basically had one drug to count on to prevent rejection. And let me tell you, it wasn't what it is today. I've often commented on the courage of the patients who undergo transplantation. And as courageous as it may seem today, and it is, you can only imagine the courage to undergo a liver transplant at a time where success rates were in the 50s and not in the 90%. So John Bergen was the surgeon who performed the first kidney transplant at Northwestern in 1964. He also started really the first transplant program in Illinois, and for 10 years really kept at it. It wasn't like he did one kidney transplant, said, okay, there it is, I've done it, let's move on to the next thing. He really kept at it, began the first transplant registry of the American College of Surgeons, which went on for many years until UNOS took it over, and had a lot of firsts. And it was very courageous for Dr. Bergen. I know his daughter Betsy Altman is here, and I know that Dr. Bergen must have been away from home a lot while he did all these surgeries and was committed to patients. But like most physicians' kids, there's a recognition that they're doing it for the right reasons. Dr. Bergen became the chief of the vascular surgery service at Northwestern, the first chief, the first Magenstat professor, and has a very strong legacy he spent his whole career at Northwestern, and so we owe him, all of us, a great debt of gratitude for his efforts. And here's a picture around the time that he was performing these transplants. And again, we wanted to just make a tribute to him and his memory today. In 1989, we were just trying to get people to live through the operation. Kidneys had become more or less standard. It was just becoming successful, and liver transplantation was a little bit behind. And really, we just wanted to get the patient through the operation. And you know, thinking of 10 and 15-year survivals was not even on our radar, even though patients did survive, luckily, for many years. I think I've run into half a dozen patients here today who have told me that they're somewhere between, I think, 13 and 18 years out. Our first liver transplant here was Terry Costello. He usually comes to these things, and it was on August 25th, 1993. So we've been at it for quite a while here. A couple of years ago, we hit 1,500 liver transplants, and we're getting close to 2,000. So we've come a long ways. And so at these meetings in the past, we have talked to you about advancing the science, which is really what we need to do. We need to make sure that, you know, we've just closed our 50th year, so 2014 was our 50th anniversary. This is now 2015, and I look at it as the first year of the next 50 years. And it's really amazing how we've changed or we've added on to the type of research that we do in transplantation. So the immediate research that we had to do to get people to not reject their organs was really based in immunology and making sure they don't get infections and things like that. And that took a whole lot of science and a whole lot of knowledge to get there. But achieving great clinical results is not all that we need to do. There are a whole bunch of social sciences that we have ignored in the process of getting to this point. And so a few years ago, I thought that without a strong social science research program, a program in health services and outcomes research, we really weren't doing our job. And so one of the first people that we recruited to Northwestern was Elisa Gordon, who is going to be speaking to you today. And I have to admit, as we were looking at potential candidates to recruit to do this type of research, and I looked at her CV, I said to myself, I never thought I would even meet a medical anthropologist. I don't even know what a medical anthropologist does. But here she was, a medical anthropologist, and I have since learned what medical anthropologists do. And what medical anthropologists do is they look at the patient as a human being, not just as a body with blood going through it, an immune system. And they look at the kinds of things that human beings need to know about before they embark on something as big as a transplant. In fact, the kinds of things that they should know about before they embark on something as little as a haircut. It's called informed consent. It's called knowing what you're in for, knowing the alternatives, knowing what if I don't do this, what might happen. And so there's an entire field called health literacy. And the field has advanced significantly in the last few years around transplantation, and it really focuses on making sure one of the many areas that it advances is making sure that when patients and donors make a decision to go ahead, that they know exactly what they're getting into and what the potential consequences might be. I won't name names, but I was reminded today that, and so I'm not a medical anthropologist, obviously, but I still think that people should know what they get into. And so I was reminded today that a daughter who donated more than half of her liver to her mom, and they are here today, they both reminded me that on the way to the operating room, I asked them both if they were ready to die that day. Because you can die as a result of being a donor. And you can die as a result of being a recipient. And so I thought that that was my way of making sure that they were informed. Lucky for you and lucky for the world, there are people like Elisa Gordon that can do this in a much more tactful way. So she is going to speak to you today about what some of those methods might be. So Marilyn, I really apologize that that was how I sent you off to the operating room, right? Am I making this up? So Lisa, why don't you come on up here and tell this crowd, you know, how not to talk to patients.
Thank you so much. Can you all hear me? Can you hear me okay? Thank you so much, Dr. Advocacy. I really appreciate your wonderful introduction. And I also wanted to thank the Transplant Advisory Committee Council for inviting me to speak with you all and to get to know many of you in the transplant village. So it's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you. Let me just, here we go. So I'm going to be talking with you a bit about some of my research. I titled this Empowering Patients with Data, Decision Aids in Organ Transplantation and Donation. So there are a couple of my studies that I'll review with you and just share our findings with you, and it's very exciting. But first, I just wanted to share some fun comic strips. Certainly, transplant is not a joke, but these are nice little comments. I hope you can all see what these say here. I won't read them. So, okay. So what I want to do is talk to you a little bit about how I got involved in transplantation and donation, why decision aids are important, tell you a little about a bit about a couple of my projects, the website project, the iPad app project, and the survey instrument that I developed here as well. So how did I get involved in transplantation and donation? Well, it all started out when I was in graduate school learning how to become a medical anthropologist. And I was learning about how the healthcare system has a lot of cultural values and beliefs that are kind of embedded within it. And one aspect of our healthcare system is the ethical issues that can arise. And so there was some research that I had come across where they did some research in Japan about organ transplantation, and they found that the deceased donor rates were like nearly zero. Okay, I'm thinking, what's going on? But the living donation rates were like way up, which is so different from like what's going on in the United States, and this was back in the 90s. And so the researcher found that there were certain cultural values and religious beliefs that were influencing, this kind of dynamic. And it turns out that in Japan, reciprocity is a very strong cultural value. So how can you give back to a deceased donor if you received an organ from a deceased donor? That process just can't unfold. And so living donation became the much more common way that people supported patients who needed an organ. So I thought, geez, this is fascinating. Can we bring to the United States some of the lessons that we've learned in these other cultural contexts? So that's part of my interest in being a medical anthropologist and also doing work in ethics to see how we can apply and understand what some of our cultural values and beliefs are that we bring to the way we understand transplantation. Many people ask me if I have any relatives who are involved in transplant. I don't, but my mom was a lawyer. My stepdad was a physician, and so I bring with me a very strong sense of justice in healthcare. So that's also how I try to approach this. So, all right, so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about decision aid. So what is a decision aid? Has anyone ever heard of a decision aid before? Can you raise your hand if you have heard of a decision aid? One. I see like 3, 4 hands up. Okay. So decision aids are tools that really help patients make informed treatment decisions. They're there to help you think about all the different options. And usually decision aids come into play when there are more than 2 good possible treatment options. And you're really trying to figure out what to do, what's the best possible option. My computer screen just went out right here. So I'm wondering if someone who's doing the AV equipment can help pull up my screen, because it just went blank. But I can look off of this, so in the meantime. Okay, so, so another key function of these decision aids is that they really help you not only decide what to do when you have many options, okay, but also to help you figure out how your values coincide with the values that are being offered, or that are how your values might align with each of those options, okay? And there are very, very few decision aids in the transplant context. I've only come across like 2, but they really don't help people understand, thank you, like what they're getting themselves into very much, Okay, so they're really not available for people, many like yourselves, to decide, help you make all kinds of important decisions. So here are a couple examples of decision aids in other clinical settings, like if you were to have breast cancer, do you go for a mastectomy or lumpectomy? Or if you had prostate cancer, would you go for surgery, radiation, or as opposed to just watchful waiting? So those are very hard decisions to make. Here's what one kind of decision aid could look like. You see all these smiley faces, and that helps to give a sense of like how common something is, like the amount of risk that there may be. So here's a choice of treatment for stroke. Do you go for aspirin or warfarin? So this is just what one image of a decision aid can look like. So why are decision aids valuable? They can do all kinds of things. So just to give you a brief overview, they can help increase your knowledge about treatment options, create more realistic expectations about the different treatments and what you can get out of them. They can help to balance the sense of risks and benefits of each of these options. It helps people be more accurate about the nature of the risks that are involved. It helps people become more satisfied with the information that they're getting, can reduce patient anxiety, and in some cases, there's been research showing it can even decrease the time it takes during a clinical consultation. So all kinds of things. So now I'd like to ask all of you, what kinds of decision aids would you like if they were available, or would you have liked if they were available? Can I see a show of hands, like, would it have helped you to have a decision aid to help you decide, should I get a transplant or stay on dialysis? Would that have helped anyone? No? Okay. Oh, okay.
I'm an old dialysis nurse, and part of our treatment plan included giving the patient different options and explaining the options and the risks involved. And every patient I talked to was always told they could be on hemodialysis or peritoneal dialysis, they could do it themselves, they could do it at home, or the other option was a transplant. So I see that as a decision aid.
It can be, yeah. Okay, and so how about whether to seek a living donor or a deceased donor organ? Would anyone? I see a hand there. How about whether to accept or turn down an organ offer? Maybe. So these are some, okay, so
That's an interesting question, because that's dependent on the situation you have going into a potential transplant.
yeah, so
There'd be a lot of communication that would have to happen between yourself, the doctor, and the situation that transplant authority is coming from.
certainly.
You're always in a situation where you can provide or have the background knowledge to speak with the doctor. I guess you really need a lot of help with that communication.
Right, right. So these decision aids are there to supplement the conversations and assist in that conversation. So these are kinds of decisions that other people have told me that they would be interested in seeking some help with. So I'm going to turn now to some of the projects that I've worked on, and this is the first one. And this is a website that I developed called Informate. It's also called Inform Yourself About Living Kidney Donation for Hispanics and Latinos. And this is a project that our very own Dr. Caicedo, who's in the front row, is my collaborator on. And just to give you a little bit of background about this particular project, there are a lot of disparities that Hispanics and Latinos experience in terms of getting access to transplantation and living donation. So we're trying to address that problem. Hispanics got fewer transplants than non-Hispanic whites in 2014, even though they have a higher prevalence of end-stage kidney disease in the population. So that's 14% of Hispanics versus 23% of whites got a transplant. And then with regard to living donor kidney transplant, fewer Hispanics than non-Hispanic whites also got a living donor transplant. So our concern is that we have to do something to address this kind of disparity. And so some of the factors that have contributed to low living kidney donation rates in the Hispanic community, based on some of the research I've done and other people's work, we found that there's some misconceptions about living kidney donation, for concerns about life expectancy, language barriers, concerns about immigrants being able to get a transplant, cultural concerns. Can I have a baby after I've donated a kidney? Both men and women had expressed that concern to us in our research. Other concerns that Hispanics and other ethnic minority groups have commented on include a lack of knowledge, fear of surgery, financial concerns, distrust of the medical establishment, and so on. So what we wanted to do was to evaluate whether getting exposed to a bilingual, culturally targeted website would increase Hispanics' knowledge about living kidney donor transplantation. So we developed this website in collaboration with the National Kidney Foundation of Illinois, and it contains these 6 different kind of sections of the website: treatment options, living donation, financial issues, and so on. Here's a sample page of one of the sections called Cultural Beliefs and Myths, and these are videos, video testimonials as well. And so we included, there were a total of 282 individuals who participated, 112 patients, 170 family members and friends. And we found that people gained significantly more knowledge after they were exposed to the website the same day compared to those people who only went to standard education alone. And then we called people up 3 weeks later to see how much they retained their knowledge. And it turns out that people exposed to the website gained significantly more knowledge than those who only attended their education 3 weeks later. And when we controlled for all the kinds of demographic variables that people have, you know, age and gender, it turns out that those who were exposed to the website had 10% more knowledge 3 weeks later. So this is working, and it's very exciting to see it happen. And then we also asked a couple other questions, like for those who were exposed to the website, would you come back? And the vast majority said that they would. So 93% said they would come back to the website in the future. Most said that they agree or strongly agree that the website, that they would recommend it to other Hispanics or Latinos, that they understood the information, or that it's made for other Hispanics and Latinos. So we're very excited about this website being made available and in the general public. And we believe that it can increase individuals' knowledge about living donation above and beyond an in-person Spanish education session. And we should use this as a supplement to our current education program at transplant centers across the country. And our key goal is to enable people to become more informed, really. That's our big goal, to help people make informed treatment decisions. And I wanted to acknowledge our sources of funding. We got funding from the Department of Health and Human Services, Health Resources and Services Administration, as well as Northwestern's Eleanor Wood Prince Grants Initiative from the Women's Foundation. So I'm most grateful for all of this support. And here's my research team, both here at Northwestern and at UC Davis. Another project that I've worked on is another kind of decision aid, and this is an iPad app called Informe. So as you can tell, all these names, I'll have a similar sound to them: Informate, Informe, try to get people well informed. Given that there is a very large organ shortage, many centers are increasingly considering using what's called increased risk donor kidneys for transplantation. And increased risk donors are those donors who have engaged in behaviors that are associated with a greater risk of transmitting like HIV, hepatitis B, or hepatitis C. So, so that's why transplant centers have to ask patients, hey, are you willing to accept one of these kinds of organs? Because there's a very, very slight chance that the organ can come with one of those diseases. So, you know, patients may be afraid of accepting one of those organs. About 10% of all US organs are increased risk donor organs. And so if we use them, then it can help to increase and expand the donor pool and help to address the organ shortage, as well as reduce the time waiting for a transplant. And as you may know, if you reduce the time waiting, then that can help to reduce the chances of dying while waiting. So one of the questions I have for all of you is, would you accept an increased risk donor organ? Can I see a show of hands of a yes? So quite a few of you. Okay, great. All right. One of the problems with this is that information that's disclosed to patients, and I'm not talking about here per se, I'm talking about like in the country, that studies have shown that the kinds of information and the amount of information is really variable across transplant centers, okay, in terms of the amount, the timing, when people are informed about increased donor kidneys. And the problem with this variation is that there may be some bias in that some people may get the information they need while others may not, and that's a real problem. And so if people don't get that information, how are they supposed to make an informed treatment choice? So we developed this decision aid called Inform Me in order to increase kidney transplant candidates' knowledge about this organ type, increased risk donor organs, and also to reduce any kind of indecision about these increased risk donor kidneys. So Inform Me is an iPad app, and it has all kinds of interesting capabilities to it. It's very interactive. It uses what's called computer adaptive learning. So you may be familiar with this, like if you answer a question, there are survey questions embedded in it, and if you answer a question one way, you might get a different kind of question that comes up afterward. So it helps to really personalize and tailor the information to the needs of the specific user. And so it's very interactive. There are videos, and it's written in a very easily understandable language. So it's really designed to help educate people and help them make a decision. And here's a sample, one of the pages from the iPad app. Okay. And in this study, there were about 201 patients who participated. And we found that patients who were exposed to Inform Me had significantly greater knowledge compared to those who didn't use the tool. And that was on the same day and again 1 week later. And then those who used Inform Me had a 2% greater knowledge score 1 week after education. And that's after controlling for, again, all the demographics. And that is a significant increase. And so, and also patients who used Inform Me had less uncertainty about whether to accept an increased risk donor and greater willingness to use one. So we think that this is very helpful. So it's better than the current education alone. We did this study at 2 different transplant centers, also at UAB. And so we're recommending then that transplant centers use Inform Me to supplement current education and in order to enhance patient comprehension about increased risk donor kidneys, to standardize the education across all transplant centers to avoid that variation. And perhaps this methodology could even be used for other kinds of organs and other kinds of decisions that have to be made. Oh, I just wanted to share with you some really fun parts about this. Here's an animation that, let's see if we can make it happen. Oops. Here's a little animation that's part of this tool. If you can see. So you're waiting on the list, the kidney goes, if you refuse the organ, it goes to the next person in line. And you don't lose your place in line. See, you keep your place. So here's another one. I know we're kind of running tight on time, but I'll skip this one. Here's our very own Dr. Mike Eisen from the Transplant ID side, and there's a video of him. And I also wanted to acknowledge the NIH for funding of this study, and my team across Northwestern and UAB. And then just to wrap up, there's one last project I wanted to share with you, and this is a survey instrument that I've developed for live liver donors. And the concern is that for adult-to-adult live liver donation, there are many risks that many people are exposed to, and there's no direct medical benefit to the liver donor population. So it's really important that they understand the risks. And here's just another polling question. If you're a living donor, I could lose my job. True, false? Who says true? So it is a potential possibility. So we developed a survey instrument to assess knowledge and comprehension about live liver donation. We called it Evaluation of Donor-Informed Consent Tool, or EDICT. And 26 liver donors participated, and we found that in very preliminary set of information that it was demonstrating good reliability in testing. And I just wanted to wrap this up, that this tool may be used to help transplant centers standardize the assessment of potential liver donors in terms of their comprehension about donation to enhance informed consent. And it might be useful in order to identify people who are most at risk. I think I just kind of skipped. There were a couple people who had lower scores, such as those who are Hispanic, had lower income, and those who didn't have insurance. So if we can identify people in advance who might be at risk, maybe we can do a better job focusing on addressing their information needs. And I wanted to acknowledge the support I got from the NIH and my team. And just to wrap up, here are some next steps. We want to go live with the website and disseminate the website to transplant centers across the country. With regard to InforMe, our goal is to do some revisions to the iPad software so that it can become ready to go online for everyone to use. So we're looking for funding to support that step. And with regard to EDICT, we need to test it with some larger numbers of living donors at other centers before that's ready to go live. So I wanted to thank you all, and happy anniversary day, many of you.
We're going to have a Q&A, and I know there's many questions. Some people wrote them on cards. If you have a question, I think somebody's roaming with a mic. So
just wanted to add a couple of points. So, you know, Elisa makes this look real simple, but there's a tremendous amount of science behind this. So I was sitting next to my good friends there, and when Elisa put up the question, would you accept an organ from, you know, would you accept or turn down an organ? And my good friend said, well, I would just leave that up to the doctor. And thank you. But in medicine, we believe paternalism is a bad thing, and patient autonomy is what we're after. So I guess if I tell you to go jump off a building, you'll do that too. So, you know, I think the point is that we're trying to, of course, we are going to make recommendations, but I think it's really important to make sure that patients, and especially donors, have donor autonomy in making the decisions. And the only way that they can truly have donor autonomy is to be fully informed. And in case you think that transmission of HIV is something that is hypothetical, I will tell you that some 10 years ago, we had a transmission in Chicago. There was a donor that had what we call risky behavior. I forget what the increased risk behavior, but passed all the tests, and all the testing was negative. 4 organs from that patient were transplanted in Illinois. We transplanted 1 organ. Another institution transplanted 2 organs, and 1 other institution transplanted 1 organ. Patient that we transplanted came to the clinic about 7 months after the transplant, and I happened to see him, and things just didn't make any sense. So I sent off some blood work, and I don't even know why, but I sent off an HIV and a hepatitis C. And this was a kidney transplant patient that was HIV negative and hepatitis C negative before the transplant. So I got a call from the lab, and the lab said, well, the patient has both HIV and hepatitis C. And I said, okay, I hate being right, especially when you get an answer like this. So let me look and see what's going on. So I went back, talked to the patient, and just assumed that the patient had done, something that had exposed him to HIV and hepatitis C. And after a long and candid discussion with the patient, I came away convinced that there was no way that this patient had contracted hepatitis C or HIV after the transplant. So I made a call to the organ bank, and I spoke to the medical director, and I said, I think there's been a transmission here. And he said, that's impossible. We had 3 negative serologies. And I remember it was a Friday night. And I said, well, if you have some blood left from that donor, I suggest you send it off for NAT testing, because I'm sure that this patient contracted HIV and hepatitis C from this donor. And were there any other organs transplanted? And he said, yeah, there were 3 other organs transplanted, 2 at one hospital and 1 at the other hospital. I said, well, you better alert them. And he goes, well, why would I alert them? I think you're dreaming this up. And I said, fine. I got a call from him on Saturday morning, and sure enough, when they did the NAT testing, which wasn't available at that time, the donor had both HIV and hepatitis C. And of course, they alerted the patients. Now, we had told this patient that the donor had this, high-risk behavior. We had told the recipient that the donor had the high-risk behavior. And this was a patient, for those of you that have had a kidney transplant, who was 99% sensitized and had a negative cross-match with this kidney. So this person's chance of getting another kidney was pretty much 0%. So this was their shot. And, they said, well, what should I do? And I said, well, I think you should take the kidney. We have 3 negative serologies, and we'd never had a transmission before. And, but we sat down and went over the risk with the patient. Long story short, there were 3 lawsuits at the other hospitals, and we didn't get sued because we informed the patient. But what it caused us to think is my conversation did not include any numbers, I just said, my gut tells me that, you're going to be okay, you should be okay. Now, the risk of transmission in that setting is about 1 in a million. So, in retrospect, of course, we shouldn't have done the transplant. But these things do happen. And so we have to, and we, like Elisa said, 10%. And by the way, it's a lot higher than that. So the CDC has determined that anybody who has more than 2 sexual partners in a year is considered high-risk behavior. Well, I don't know how many of you have kids in college, but that means every college, or if you remember your days in college. But, so the CDC definitions for high risk are, pretty liberal. So, yeah, we have to inform patients, but we have to make sure that we give them the kind of information and the kind of data that they can make their own decision as to whether they're willing to take the risk or not. So I just want to, emphasize that, Elisa has a wonderful way of making things, real simple. And one of the things that I learned from her over the years is that if I tell a patient that you've got a 5% chance of, something bad happening to you, and they look at me, because 5% means nothing to them. But if I show them a picture with 95 smiley faces and 5 frowny faces, all of a sudden they understand what a 5% risk means. And it's little tools like that that have been developed and validated by these social scientists that we have to make available to our patients who may not understand what we tell them in our education classes. Not because they're not smart. They're smart. It's just not something that they can identify with readily. So I want to thank Elisa for giving us a wonderful talk, and hopefully you all have some questions. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
There's a microphone coming.
All right. No, I'll read it. The African Americans are very distrusting of the medical community. African Americans are very distrusting of the medical community as well. This is because of the history of how that we know how African Americans have been treated by the medical community. And in my family, my family has polycystic kidney disease. And so half of my family, get it and the other half don't. But no one in my family has donated a kidney. I mean, I've done a lot of talking, but, it doesn't happen. So I'm just wondering, number one, how do you address the distrust in the overall community, and can you give me some pointers on what I can do to convince some of my family members to be donors? Thank you.
Thank you for this wonderful question. Can you hear me okay? So I think that's an excellent question, and it's really challenging to address issues of distrust in the healthcare system. I mean, it's not just in transplant, but it cuts across all of healthcare. I think the one approach is through education and providing information in a very neutral, unbiased kind of way, so that people can get the facts. There are so many urban legends out there that kind of get brought up, but it's really important to dispel those kinds of urban legends or whatever misconceptions that people may have. So I think getting the facts straight is, I think, the number one priority, and making the information available in a clear way that people can understand and make sense to them. If polycystic kidney disease is in your family, then asking people to donate, I don't know if that would necessarily clinically be the thing to do. I'll defer to Dr. Abecassis with that.
Yes, as you know, there are many types of polycystic disease, and I think the best thing to do is to speak to one of the nephrologists to tell you there's certain ages. I mean, there's a lot of questions that go into deciding whether somebody with a family member that has polycystic disease should donate. But typically in the familial cases, we don't recommend it. So there are three questions that came up. One, I'm going to hand off to Dr. Gordon, and the other two I'll handle because they're not kind of in her domain. One is, what new immunosuppressants are in development? And the answer is, well, we could spend an hour telling you about these. There are some very cool drugs in development. The most interesting thing is the tolerance induction protocol that we are known for throughout the world. We were the first people in the world to do it, and I think that's probably the most exciting thing that's going on, but there are new immunosuppressants in development. And the second is whether we have FibroScan to here. And we do have, there are various forms of FibroScan. That's a way to check how firm your liver is instead of doing a biopsy. And there's different ways to do that. You can do it with ultrasound. You can do it with MRI, and we certainly have those here. But they're not really relevant to the talk. I'm happy to go into more of these later, but then maybe she can answer the question that I couldn't answer. So.
All right, so this question is asking, is Informe available on Android? So thanks for the question. Well, the best I can do is answer it in a kind of a roundabout way. We developed this so that it would be designed for a tablet, like an iPad tablet. And so, you know, if you're using an Android, it might work on that. I mean, technically you can access it by typing in the URL into a website, okay, and to any, you know, online platform. So I'm sure it would be accessible as long as you have Wi-Fi connectivity and to enable the videos to go. It just hasn't been converted into a live usage yet, but you could access it technically.
So we'll be, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be rude, but this is the operating room texting me, so Dr. Ladner is in there and she had a question for me. Did you want to come up? So we'll be around to answer questions after we finish this, but I think that, Dan, I don't know what's next on the program, but it's time for us to. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you both. And if you have any other questions, please feel free. Plenty of doctors around here today. So I'd like to introduce to you Jeff Crane. Jeff is a very active member of our board, and he's helped us along with our new project. So Jeff, you'd come up and talk about our endowment.
You could all take out the brochure. You'll see my picture right on the front of it. I guess I'm the poster boy this year. I'm happy to be standing here today. Actually, I'm really lucky to be standing here today. Probably every major medical event that's happened to me in my life has happened within probably less than a mile of where we're standing today, with the exception of the birth of my twin granddaughters 19 months ago. I was born at Pasadena Hospital in 1952. In 1968, I had a major surgery here as a 16-year-old where I had a hemangioma removed from my scalp by a team of doctors, Dr. Dan Ruge and Dr. John Bergman. During that surgery, Dr. Bergman came to me afterwards and said that he had to throw out his shoes after the surgery because I had taken 20 units of blood. And in 1968, what they did when they needed blood, they went to the west side of the city and they found the winos and they donated their blood so they could get their next bottle of alcohol. And it was through that surgery that I contracted hepatitis C, a disease that lived within me and I really was not aware of until probably 14 years ago. I got very sick. Actually, I started seeing Dr. Andy Bly here a long time ago. And through Dr. Bly, along with some other people in this room, we actually set up a group called New Lives, which we raised money, created an endowment, which today funds a portion of a salary of an intern, of a fellow, right, a fellow in the hepatology department. Dr. Bly continued to see me as his patient. I was handed off to Dr. Flam when Andy became the editor of the Hepatology Journal. And Dr. Flam got me to the table where Dr. Abacassis gave me a liver transplant on June 19th of 2012. Dr. Abacassis handed me off to Josh Levitsky, and I was lucky enough through the work that he was doing that I was entered into a drug study in 1 year after my transplant, and I was lucky enough to be one of 33 transplant patients in the country to be on a drug study that was performed, that was with the AbbVie drug, which is now approved. And literally within 3 weeks of starting that drug, the hepatitis C was eradicated from my system. And I'm now over 1 year post-drug, And my liver scores are better than they've been since the day I walked into this hospital and I was 16 years old. The previous speakers have done a very good job of describing to you Transplant Village, all the wonderful things which have come out of this setting up of this organization, both to patients, to the community, recognition to the doctors. It's been just a wonderful program. But today, as we start at the beginning of our second 50th year, we need to make a push. We need to make a push to establish an endowment. Endowment you can look at as being a savings account. The money that's raised that goes into an endowment sits there, and the interest which is earned off of that is used to cover costs that can be utilized towards the advancing of the science. By creating an endowment, which is really which is amongst the most important things that our group wants to accomplish, it will create some stability in our ability for organ transplant research to occur on an ongoing basis. And what is this research? What we're looking to support is we're looking to fund money for early stage research. We are trying to create medical breakthroughs and really allow for leadership in the research which will continue to push forward what Dan really spoke about before. We are looking for funds that can be used early stage, and let me at least take a second to describe what that is. What early stage research is it's to provide, in some cases, very small amounts to try to establish and see that we can get a proof of concept. And proof of concept is is basically a term that says it's going to work. It is proving that something can happen. From that point, the research then goes into the grant process, and we can establish, hopefully, good research will get money. But this enables all the early step research, which is very difficult to raise funds for directly. This endowment and the interest off of this endowment will allow for that. So today, really, what I'm standing here today is to make a call for action. And that is something that each and every one of us in this room can do. We can all give some money, each according to their means. But I think it's important that everybody that has been touched by this gets behind it and tries to give forward so that we can create a fund that will enable this hospital to continue to do the great research that they do. Participation is paramount. I know because I and my family have been contributors in the past, and we've made a leadership gift for this endowment as a starting point. And I know the feeling that you get when you are able to create you're able to provide for the good work and for the research that will occur. Everybody here is the center of their own universe. And I think that as you reach out and you look to all those people that surround you, whether they be friends, whether they be business associates, everybody that you touch, I'm sure, is thankful that you're still here. And I've found in the way that I've been able to raise funds myself is by reaching out to those whose lives that I've touched. And the fact that I am continuing to touch them today is created a scenario where they are happy to fund things which I'm interested and involved with. So I ask each of you today to make a commitment, not only personally, but also to reach out to those who surround you, to raise some money for this cause. Again, give according to your means. Reach out to everybody in your sphere. Together, we can make this happen. Join me, please, in this effort. Thank you.